So I think we're ready to go. My name is Dennis Cooley. I am the director of the Northern Plains Ethics Institute at North Dakota State University. We're lucky today to have Chancellor Mark Hagerott give a talk for our Science, Religion, and Lunch seminar. For those of you who don't know much about us, the Northern Plains Ethics Institute was founded in 2000. Our mission is to promote democratic participation in social and ethical issues affecting the Northern Plains and beyond. The Science, Lunch seminar, much older institution. It seeks to support or to explore areas of science and religion and the intersections between those. So today we're going to have Chancellor Hagerott talk about science and ethics in a big way. Before I get to him though, I also wanted to mention that we have several upcoming events. On 16th of February at 12 p.m., David Thiel is going to be talking about the North Dakota Ethics Commission. And on the 22nd of February, Dr. Kim Tallbear will be addressing indigenization, reconciliation, and decolonization in science as part of our Learning the Language of Diversity and Meaningful Inclusion program that is a year-long project for the Northern Plains Ethics Institute and the YWCA KS Clay. But now let me introduce our distinguished speaker. Mark Hagerott, PhD, serves as the Chancellor of the North Dakota State University System. Previously, he was a faculty member at the United States Naval Academy as an historian of technology, a distinguished professor, and the deputy director of the Center for Cybersecurity Studies. Among his positions in technical leadership are managing tactical data networks and the specialized artificial intelligent AEGIS system, which led to Ship Command. Hagerott served as a White House Fellow and studied at Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar. His research and writing focus on the evolution of technology and education. In 2014, Hagerott was among the first American military professors to brief the Geneva Convention on the challenge of lethal robotic machines and to argue the merits of an early arms control measure. So I'm turning this over now to Chancellor Hagerott. It's in your hands.
All right. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay.
Loud and clear.
Well, great. Well, thanks everybody for joining. And for those who haven't before, we had a wonderful event pre-COVID in Fargo at NDSU, and the topic was, can humans flourish in the age of intelligent digital machines? And then Dennis said, you know, with all this COVID stuff, what do you think? And so I felt like I was a grad student again, getting tasked by an advisor. So I started toiling away on this, and it ended up in, as you see on the first slide, an article in the Northern Plains Ethics Journal. So I just want to thank Dennis and the NDSU group for honoring me by publishing that. And interestingly, it has now been picked up by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, and an excerpt of this article just came out. And they have asked if I could even expand on it. So one of the questions I'd ask the audience in the chat room is up, you know, thoughts on like, hey, you know, you might want to expand this, or you might want to expand that. You know, you all have the article, but that would be helpful, as well as anything that you don't agree with, like, you know, I don't see it that way. Or, hey, this is just a muddled paragraph. It could still be, though Dennis did great editing when I sent him the draft. So thank you so much for tuning in. You're all part of this. And also I see in the participants, one of my bosses is there, Dr. Louders of the state board, who's a lifelong educator. Thank you for tuning in. You know, we are in epic times. That's what I would just say. Absolutely epic times. And this, the generations alive now, and I'll talk about it, have really got to put a shoulder to the plow and get involved, because changes are happening that may be very hard to reverse. And so let's just start thinking about what's happening. So the next slide you'll see here is a way to situate what's going on. And this is obviously a huge simplification, all right? A huge simplification of our worlds, plural. But I've found in several audiences, it does help people to think about what's happening. And that is that you can think of the world as the ancient, you know, human natural world that existed for hundreds of thousands of years. and then begin the development of machines from Watt's steam engine to now advanced robotics, and then this absolutely crazy thing called cyberspace, and the areas overlap. But part of my thesis is COVID is accelerating the emergence of those other two spheres and the overlap, as well as the constriction of the human natural at such a rate that informed decision-making and thinking through these things is very difficult. And we have to do lots of thinking. In the next slide, to simplify, this is the challenge I see the generations alive have, and I have a little acronym for trying to remember it, C3R, that we have to create the technology competitively, right? Otherwise, your industries become, outdated, and you fall behind. We know now, because it's digital and is at a low level of intelligence, we have to control this stuff. Whereas you didn't have to worry about controlling a piece of iron you laid down for the Northern Pacific. It was there. Okay. Now the very infrastructure of the internet can be taken over. But then for many of the humanities law people, there's a profound challenge of civilizing this technology. And one of my favorite books about the Industrial Revolution is called Civilizing the Machine. And came out in 1976 about our forefathers and grandparents and grandmothers. And I'm trying to use gender neutral language, trying to civilize the Industrial Revolution, and it's happening again. But then for this audience, we have a profound responsibility to then regenerate the learners and the thinkers and the researchers. And I compliment NDSU that has the first doctoral program in cybersecurity education in the nation. So clearly that North Dakota, Scandinavian, German emphasis on the next generation and teaching, we beat everybody else to the punch on that. So that's a challenge we have, and it's going really fast. But let me try to give you some evidence for people who are like, okay, I'm tuning in, I've not heard these other talks. If we don't think it's going like crazy, think about the things on this slide. I mean, it's just an explosion of stuff. It's going so fast that on the first one about cyber attacking, I know a guy named Spafford, a professor, who took the first phone call of the first virus when it was first reported, and he's still alive. A guy named Vince Cerf, who was there when the internet is created. He's now at Google. He's still alive, all right? I mean, the guy who was standing over somebody as they plugged the cables back into a Honeywell 5000 mainframe, okay? But then the whole robotic thing, we're on the 100-year anniversary of that Czech writer who coined the phrase robot. And a lot of people said, yeah, it's happening. Well, it really is happening now. And there's a full-on arms race of robot warfare, sadly. Then social media was out there, and it's kind of quaint, right? It was kind of quaint for a while, right? It's not quaint anymore. I mean, it is absolutely sending reverberations through electoral systems and countries. And then you add into high performance computing, big data, that if you haven't known the game Go, AI self-taught itself in a matter of minutes and beat the American or the human champion. Taught itself how to play the game. So the idea that it's simple and controllable, I think we realize it isn't. But when you look at these complex things, you're thinking, well, what is my theory or whatever framework? And the reality is, a lot of us have theories of politics and economics and religion. Catholic, Protestant, Muslim. You have theories and frameworks of economics, communist, socialist, liberal, democratic. But there are some theories of technology that can help us frame this. And so I'm going to flick through a couple of them in these slides. This one would actually, if Norbert Wiener was alive, he'd call it the cybernetic process. But compliments of Schwarzenegger in his movies Terminator, that word is so damaged I don't even use it. But this is basically a cybernetic process that humans, animals, and now machines have to sense their environment, communicate to their brain, think about what they want to do, and then do something, okay? And humans want to do this better and faster. It is a force of nature. It's not going to stop. And in fact, I was just telling Dennis and Tyler, I just opened the AI advisory paper going to the President of the United States today, the draft. It's open for comments to 1 March. They use this framework. I'm not saying they took it from me, but that's how, among computer scientists and thinkers of AI networks, this is how they think about the challenges. So we all do it every day. And if you notice for the ethicists here, I added this since November, Dennis, the blue where it says values, ethics, and morals. The values are being modified as we speak, and the people coding them as machines, it's a full-on debate. So this is kind of the force of nature that we are dealing with. But it is causing something at a macro level. All these little parts and pieces are now causing something at a macro level. And we've all had, macroeconomics, that whereas micro level things can still kind of seem the same. A company maximizes its profits. A teacher maximizes learning. I'm still doing that at the classroom level. But what happens when you put everything all together? And I argue, which is back to that second slide I showed of those concentric circles, we are literally having the emergence of two realms of intelligent actors, robots with AI guiding them in the human three-dimensional space, and then cyberspace. These are real places that are including intelligent actors. And as several books have said, the people alive right now are literally the most important in history because we've never had the emergence of new intelligent actors. Animals arguably preceded humans, right? So we came on later and had to accommodate to the animal world. But now these worlds are busting into what had been dominated a human natural world, and hang on to your hat. So let me just derive these two real quick to show you how, if you take that sense, think, act force and you add it in a military setting, would be a slide like this. That at the bottom in the green is where human wit and will and muscle power combined with some basic stored energy of a catapult defined the world for a couple thousand years. And then entering into the world was the beginning of rudimentary machines, gunpowder, and then steam engines, which was the integration of human and machine. That's kind of light blue. And then it begins to build with this thing called ENIAC, electronic numerical integrated something computer, analytical computer. That's it, the first digital computer. And each of these are like S curves if you begin to move up and learn and steady out. And these begin to build on each other to where we're now breaking through literally in the last few years to totally autonomous vehicles that can hunt humans down. And I think the Chinese built one for the Iraqis that can hover for 90 days in Iraq, just waiting for a human to come out of a foxhole. And so using the military examples, and I have many other slides to use economic examples, but we'll blow through here, that this process of increased complexity of sensing, thinking, acting is developing machine realm of actors and then eventually cyberspace. But a key thing to know is these are absolutely paradigm smashing and world upending. Like if you look in the box, it says Lepanto and Armada, literally superpowers collapsed because they didn't embrace gunpowder fast enough. The two battles there, I'd have a bunch of slides to show that in the matter of 17 years. And of course, we saw this happen in the civil setting here. Next slide. Oops, sorry. Well, that one wasn't supposed to show. I don't know why that showed. This could be backup. But anyway, this is a way to see integrated human machine in warfare, human-centered man tanks, and then the missile systems you see here. But here's an example of how it upended civil society, right? The natural human realm and the rise of cities was built on human slavery, right? Those are as old as see the movie Spartacus or Ben-Hur. Oh my gosh, it's slave labor, right? The tragedy for our country is we had it up till 1865. And this is an image of a treadmill. They would literally deplete these human beings, destroying them for purposes of turning a watermill. But with the integration of human machine, the steam engine, the North was able to overwhelm the Confederacy. The state of New York produced more industrial output than the entire Confederacy. And in a good way, industrial armed abolitionists wearing blue uniforms, freed 4 million people. So some really positive change could come out of this. Okay, that's my point here. And let's get closer to North Dakota. When it hit here, all right, these are actually pictures of my family's farm. The left is 1910 with my great-grandfather and grandfather. He's the boy there. There's about 20 guys in the background and about 6 women during threshing time. In a mere 28 years, the Hagerotts integrated with internal combustion engines, a Ford truck, and a Rumley combine. And that's my grandpa. And my grandpa took the picture because he was able to do the harvest by himself by 1938, which would seem that's all great, except this happened. And this slide is a famous study about the replacement of horses by tractors. Read the red on the right side. Okay, so the red is horses, so read it on the right side. So 27 million horses in 1910, down to 3 million by 1960, right? The horse population is decimated, while the tractor population
and the Hagerotts are one of the first to have steam tractors in 1910, explodes to read the blue from the left up to 4.5 million. Okay, so you think, wow, that's great, you know, but the culture was massively changed, right? The human horse culture and all the affection happened. But then something Brad Smith from Microsoft, no less, when he spoke in Fargo last year, this picture's in his book. He now makes the connection, and other scholars do, that this led to the Great Depression. As all the crops moved into cash crops, it crushed the price of wheat, and that destabilized Midwestern banks, which then led to among the first collapses on Wall Street, and we all know the rest of the story. The point being here, what looked like a very interesting, hey, we transition, save human labor, destabilize the system, and we picked up the pieces after the rise of fascism, Nazism, communism. And so you get the point, is we're going to get into the emergence of digital realms, that this is not going to be smooth, as if anybody watching the news the last couple of months thinks things are smooth. So then the way to depict it is, you've got still a human natural realm of animal husbandry, you've got the integration of human machines, and then completely robotic. NDSU is part of the totally robotic farm that Microsoft and Emerging Prairie is building just south of the campus. So it's happening perhaps first in North Dakota. So that's a way to think about the world, but that's not enough. Then we have the emergence of Cyberspace, which nobody anticipated, right? I mean, let's face it, the guy in Czechoslovakia in 1920 anticipated robots. Da Vinci anticipated, you know, flying machines. But it wasn't until Neuromancer 1984 that anybody anticipates cyberspace. Completely paradigm shift, completely unnatural, and it's here, okay? But how did it get here? Something just simple of recording and processing, right? A scribe processing, then printing press processing, and then storage of information. And then the speed at which it moved from the speed of a horse to trains. Trains are big in the postal business. To then someone started tapping at the speed of light, 3 times 10 meters a second. Well, that's no big deal. It's just going faster. No, these things coming together then create cyberspace. And as I said when I gave the brief back in NDSU last year, you know, Ken Nygaard's students could have drawn the graph on the left. That's 1980. That was the internet in 1980. Then some undersea cables connects a bunch of nodes, and now we have the internet of 2003. It literally looks like something, you know, out of the Matrix, right? But what was dumb in 2003 is now becoming intelligent with rapid AI eating and churning on all this data. And so this is the world we're dealing with. And back to Ken's military slides, it is now full-on combat in cyberspace. You know, it isn't Mr. Anderson and Neo necessarily, but they're essentially avatars like that. And if anybody had been following the news, right before Christmas, one of the biggest hacks ever, which the NSA people now call the Cyber Pearl Harbor, happened when it looks like the Russians got into just about everything, okay? And we're still sorting that out. I've had 2 calls with the governor. North Dakota did amazingly well. So this is the world we're in. And what does that mean? Here's the humility. I have no idea what this will ultimately mean for humans, politics, and the economy. But to motivate people, you're all here now, alive, to help try to sort this out, right? I mean, it's a wonderful thing that you're here in an institution and a city and a state that can engage this and bring a voice and help students to deal with this. So a way to think about it is this, that this is the world we're having. The natural human realm is still here. There's an integration of human machines, which you think about when you go on an airplane, which, let's face it, it has its own problems. Think of the Boeing Max, right? The integration of human and machine, they didn't get quite right there. Boeing lost half its value over a problem of human-machine integration, right? Then the robotics, machines talking to machines, with humans not even in the loop, which is why factories now are going dark at night. They don't need humans to walk around. And then cyberspace and AI in the cloud. That is the world, and how to look at it again is now cyberspace is overlapping all this along with humans and machines, and it's making for a really tough problem. So that was the problem I proposed back in November. And then we had COVID, okay? And I mean, it's mind-boggling, right? The speeding up of the digitization is off the charts, okay? There is an article written in Medium in August of 2020 by a New Yorker. And basically he says, New York will never be the same. And he says, BB New York 2009 when the last shock hit, and now there's AB, and the BB is before big bandwidth and AB is after big bandwidth. And he said the exponential increase in bandwidth in 11 years is going to kill Manhattan as we know it. And then he proceeds over 20 pages to catalog all the things collapsing in the civic society of Manhattan. And it's this speeding up thing that humans cannot adapt to in time. For the rest of the country, the massive shifts in wealth, you can read any number of articles now about it. It's eye-popping, right? The number of billionaires created, and meanwhile, human-centric systems are being pounded. I'm looking out at a mall that's in the process of bankruptcy in Bismarck. Labor markets weakened. A BBC report said between 90 to 140 million good jobs in the industrialized world are going to be never returning. I mean, this is a huge number when you think of children who are unemployed, elderly not employed, and how many good jobs are in the middle. And then companies in various forms of bankruptcy, the airlines, a fraction of what they were. But then community bonds weakening. You know, my wife is a volunteer at a church, and a lot of people say, well, you know, I'll just watch it from home. I don't think I really want to come back anymore. And that then reduces the giving and, you know, these human-centric, human-caring institutions. Then the whole human culture part, right? I mean, I was in meetings where people said, I'm never going to let a robot serve me food. This is now rapidly developing, and people are like, oh, good, the robot isn't infected. I feel safer eating here. I mean, what is that going to do to breaking bread, right? And then lastly, you know, human inequality was already, you know, pegging high. It's just busting through to new levels of human equality. But as we then try to think of tackling the problems I had before these last two slides, we then have this problem on the bottom. To add to this difficulty of educators and leaders getting their hands around this. And so the summary is trying to pull this together, think about the four frameworks, think of the effects of COVID, then think about locking in decisions that are poorly confused, done, and then add to it, what is truth, okay? So here is the build slide. And for you really savvy PowerPoint people like, well, those graphics aren't very, you know, work with me. I'm trying to build a slide for you. But this is essentially the world, you know, before the rise of cities and agriculture. Then we began to have machines join in, and then they become robotic. And then we had the integration of human machine, which caused lots of problems, which was Cassin's book, Civilizing the Machine, right? The overlap of machine, robotic industrialization in humans, leading to the YMCA, the YWCA, all sorts of civic organizations, the labor movements, AFL-CIO, you know, the Teamsters were people who led horses. And people don't know the Teamsters Union still has the name that the guys and gals who rode the horses, right? Well, then along comes cyberspace and all those complex problems, right? And just as we are trying to find where those lines overlap, we then start having this happen. Human-centric systems are being pounded. Human beings are being pounded, right? Their privacy, their voice, their incomes. And then meanwhile, this is exploding in influence and money and pervasiveness. So that's what we have happening in a very rudimentary way, right? And the speed at which it's happening. So just to make it harder is the decisions being now made can lock in. And what am I talking about lock in? This here, another theory. So remember, I was going to offer some theories of science and technology. This is theory 2, that there's several books, Langdon Winter, Thomas Hughes, and then a guy who wrote the book about QWERTY. If you all look at your keyboards, QWERTY, that keyboard was laid out in the 1860s, 1870s, and it's suboptimal. Numerous companies and organizations tried to break away from it, but they couldn't. Once it got about a 10, 15-year head start, typing schools, keyboards, they couldn't break the QWERTY model, and it's on our iPhone today. And so technologies have a habit. If you don't, in the early stages, discover your problems or your sub-optimization, it gets very hard progressively as labor and capital and politics begin to gather around it. And in the late stage, if you've really locked in, it becomes almost unimaginable to undo the mistake. I give an example. Minneapolis was the center of the computer industry, but they didn't take seriously the microchip and a couple people who moved to Silicon Valley. Minnesota had controlled data. They had Remington Rand. They had Honeywell, right? And in 1958, Silicon Valley had nothing. The military example, the nuclear arms race, right? I mean, once this thing got going, they couldn't stop it until we almost blew up the world, and then we finally got the red phone and then arms control. Nuclear design. I'm a former nuclear engineer. I worked on reactors that had a 1955 design, but they were on ships, and the worst thing that happened is the ship sank, okay? Fukushima still had 1955 reactor design because that's what gained momentum. And look at that poor part of their country, devastated because it was inherently dangerous. Guess what? They're not going to build any reactors 1955 design anymore, but look how long it went. And think of the walkable cities today. I mean, Fargo's blessed with a wonderful downtown, as is Bismarck, but many of us can point to disasters putting freeways through cities and how you undo that, right? So it's going to happen again with the decisions being made now. And so how do we deal with that? And the problem is also in academia. So here's a slide. I hope you like the coffee stains on the upper left, because I found this in my my den, man cave. This is the brief I gave the Geneva Convention 7 years ago, and with coffee stains now. Laws stand for Lethal Autonomous Weapons System. And I'm in a room with 100 ambassadors, generally older, and some of them said, you know, I'm too old for this. And I heard that, and I made this slide about a half hour before I went on stage. And I said, you elder statesmen in the room, men and women, and the young people who are agitated and want to change, it's crucial you get involved, because all of us, including me, maybe Dennis Cooley, that once you're mid-career, you're kind of locked in a system, right? And it's very hazardous. As a rational actor, it's hazardous to embrace too many radical new ideas. Otherwise, how do you pay for college for your kids? How do you populate your IRA? And I had put Amazon and Google down there at the time, because I said, even these companies now, and this is 7 years ago, I said, I think they are already locking into their models, their attitudes already. And so it's imperative that we have empathy for mid-career people who are vested in their structures, but the younger people and the older people who are secure, including those with money, have got to help break some of the things that are holding back the change that has to happen. So that's the problem of momentum, that human beings themselves can be captured. But then I had one more problem. Remember I said there's one more problem. And that is, you know, what is truth here in a day of so much information, you know, and fake news. And now there's fake news on the stock market even, all right? I mean, I was telling Dennis I couldn't update these slides fast enough this week, right? That there's Wall Street Journal articles, Washington Post articles, like, what does this mean for Wall Street? What is even truth in investing my grandparents' IRA, right? And so young people who are impressionable, who are relying on knowledge to be imparted to them that's trustworthy, are absolutely targeted. And if anybody's seen the Netflix special, The Social Dilemma, they have Netflix got insiders saying we absolutely targeted the teenagers, because many of the older people had resistance, they had critical thinking. And so what do we do for these young people who are being inundated with all this stuff, maybe while they sit in your classroom? And this leads then to a thing called enemy, which was something that Durkheim identified in the Industrial Revolution at beginning of a detachment and value frameworks leading to increasing suicide, addiction, which Janet Twenge in her book, iGen, clearly documented. And now the early data coming in is COVID is even accelerating that. These young people are being buffeted by this. So what do we do? Here were some of the recommendations that were in the paper. And again, I don't expect you guys, you know, all plow through all the paper. And I think, Dennis, I'm doing okay on time, right? I'm close to the end here with a half hour. Is that about right? Am I doing okay? Yeah. So these were things in the last part of the paper, some of them radical, okay? And I give Bernie Sanders credit that if you followed what happened in 2009, and Senator Dorgan, I give him credit too. He pounded the table in Washington when they were bailing out the banks. And he's saying, what are you doing for the people, okay? And you know what we did for the people? Practically nothing. All right? It's a shame what happened in 2009. We smashed so many people. Didn't happen this time. And I give Bernie Sanders and other people, and I'm apolitical. I'm not a socialist. I'm not a Democrat or Republican, but Bernie Sanders and the young people who rallied around him started saying, what about the people who are being whipsawed by this massive economy? And so they're debating on the House floor right now, supporting people, right? They want to send a check to people. But the problem is a lot of people are sitting on the money. They really need to infuse money into human-centric companies and human-centric labor markets, right? I mean, don't just send the checks to people, send it to the organizations, because, you know, there are bankruptcies crossing the restaurant business, the hotel business, you know. So number one is you've got to infuse money to the entrepreneurs and the middle-class people who are trying to build companies, not just give money for my nephew, who's a great guy, who's sitting on the couch collecting money and day trading right now. He's loving this, right? He's got to get another check to day trade. Secondly, support the caring economy. I know this is going to be radical to some, but it might even mean giving money to churches, which means a constitutional crisis and everything else. But think of poor Lutheran Social Services, right? Lutheran Social Services, a 100-year-old organization, has just gone into bankruptcy. I don't even know what our state's going to do without those people. But since they are a denominated type of entity, maybe they have to rename themselves before they lose their wonderful workforce. But it's time to think about the economy that cares for people. And, you know, I'm a big Mahomes guy, the guys who play the Super Bowl. The guy's paid $300 million? Seriously? And yet Lutheran Social Services is allowed to go bankrupt? We got to rethink that, okay? Then number three, and we got some slides, we have to have a major reinvestment, K-12 and higher ed. And if any legislators are here, I want to thank them, because North Dakota is, I think, one of the top 25% in the nation of the states still supporting the education of their young people and their adult workers. Many states are not. If the camera would show me, I'm holding Michael Crow's book, The Fifth Wave, and he says, challenges this legislators across the country, stop decapitalizing higher ed. You've got to get back in this work. This is profound work of a community and a state. So we're funded pretty well, but we need more. Then fourth, a presidential task force on basically this type of stuff. It's so big, you can't rely on just people to do this on their own, but as task force to study what does this mean. And if the governors can get together and do it regionally, you know, all the better. But we really got to think about this so we don't have an episodic response to crises. And then back to when I said the initial slide, can we adapt fast enough? There's got to be a more coordinated way to think about the rapid evolution of digital machines and what it's doing to people in those overlapping areas. And last, most radically to some, but it isn't that radical. And in the paper, Dennis said, good reference. Bill Gates, none other than Bill Gates, maybe one of the most generous men in history, proposed in 2017, we probably got to think taxing the robots. Now I think he needs to add social media and cyberspace. He was just looking at robots displacing humans in workforce. So this idea that we've got to have a tax structure to redistribute the money. And I can tell you, I was in a meeting off the record with a guy who ran part of the wealthy Google first 10 investors. And he said, we know the money system is broken. The money is not recycling. And I proposed this idea then. He goes, I know it's probably suicide for anybody to say this, but I think the time is coming. Intelligent machines or intelligent actors, intelligent algorithms. And there was just a paper written about we better stop now before we allow algorithms to start to own money. But they really were talking about that algorithms might be bequeathed in wills, right? There are wills that give money to animals, right? What about the first will from a cyber entrepreneur who bequeaths his billion-dollar fortune to an algorithm? But we don't tax machines. See what I'm getting at? I mean, it's really mind-bending, some of this stuff. But COVID, I think, is a way of clarifying this. So Dennis, I was thinking we could stop there because these are kind of the big national issues. And then, you know, if some of the people who aren't interested in higher ed, they can go off and then we can get in the last 5 slides of getting down to the details of you know, our universities and what things we might be able to do. Would that make sense to stop here on this slide and just have people chime in? And then for the higher ed, you know, people who want to really get into, okay, what do we do? Then we can go deeper.
Well, I think that, just a minute, Mike. Okay, I think that makes perfect sense. So what we'll do, we have the chat feature. If you have a comment for him now, I'm just looking at, there's a couple of comments. I think you have this as well, Mark. But so if you put that there, then we can call on you and we can have a little bit of a discussion. I have a question while we're waiting for that, by the way. If it's all right, Mark, if you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, I muted to stop the feedback in case that was a source. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's see. Here's my question to you. I think you're right about the impact of technology, but how are you going to slow it down so that people can think about the long-term consequences? Because what we're doing now is we make these innovations, and as you're saying in your for your grandfather, it took a while for people to figure out, oh, this is what the consequence is, because we're not terribly good at this. So how would you address that?
Wow. Yeah. Well, it might have to be policy. And I'm an academic, so I refer to things I wrote. I had a long article I wrote for Council on Foreign Relations, and they canned it. They didn't like it. And I said, and the title was basically approaching the limits of speed and automation. Okay. And it basically is what you just said, Dennis, is like, we are going so fast and we are automating so many things. We are going to have a train wreck. And I included things that there was no reason to automate them, okay? Things that move at human speed. And so I drew a distinction. I said this at the Geneva Convention too. I said, if you're dealing with hypersonic missiles being launched at each other, then you probably got to have the fastest AI interceptors in the world, okay? Have at it. I don't think the American people could give a rip. Just stop the missiles. But when you start getting down to the human natural realm, because I use these very similar slides, I say when you're talking about human natural realm, where people move at human speed, humans learn at a well-defined level of kindergarten through K, right? Then there's a reason to slow things down and match human speed, right? And really absorb what these things mean. And I gave the example, and I apologize for the military examples, but I taught military history. I said, the Battle of Jutland in 1916, if you remember, the German fleet came out to meet the English fleet. And Winston Churchill famously said, the admiral of the English fleet was the only person who could lose the war in an afternoon, because sure enough, fleet engagements were over in a matter of hours. And this is in history. When you have big machines fighting, they fight at machine speed, right? And so things like that, you probably have to automate as fast as you can go, because we're in an arms race, which is a tragedy. And I did brief at Geneva Convention, get an arms control regime in now before you lose control of this, okay? And so at those things, you have to go fast. But then I said, interestingly, let's go 80 miles out of Jutland to the shore and trench warfare, where humans were fighting humans and trying to upset social structures. They fought it out for 4 years, killing millions of people. There was no easy solution to human social activities, and so this has been demonstrated again in warfare. There was a battle in Syria called the Bekaa Valley, and in one day, the Israeli Air Force destroyed the entire Syrian Air Force in one day because of their faster computers, their faster radar, faster missiles. But guess what? Southern Lebanon and Syria is a mess today, right? I mean, it's a tragedy, a human tragedy, right? And yet, did they have the cultural historians and the linguists involved in, hey, what are we going to do before we invade Southern Lebanon, right? And I think of our own country, Iraq and Afghanistan, what a catastrophe, right? So my thought is, you don't try to do everything, otherwise you'll get laughed out of the room by, the Microsoft AI algorithm people, right, who are trying to price the price of wheat. But things like, human-centric activities, that back to that slide we had, we start putting up defenses maybe, against this, right? We basically put some defenses up along the lines of drawing lines of the human natural realm of things that are going to say essentially human and at human speed. That would be my thought. And then other things, you don't fight the battle because we won't win, right? I mean, high-speed trading on Wall Street, who's going to listen to us, right? So that's my thought, is you break them out and think about this way. And take the battles where you can, like hold the line now. And I saw the one question about the classroom by Ken Lepper. He says he tries to minimize technology, in the classroom, and that's probably, he's innately on the right side, that they're humans. They want empathy. They want him to walk in and look at a youngster and say, we'll get you through this, and not saying, look at the PowerPoint. PowerPoint says you'll get through this, right? They want to see his face, look at him. So that'd be my answer to your question if I didn't go on too long.
Ganapathy has a question, and what I'd like to do is have him ask it if he's still there.
Why do we consider the machine realm as non-human when the realm is the product of the human mind and human socio-cultural processes?
Wow. Oh, man, this is, that, there are people, that I've met that really don't hold human beings as sacred. So this slide I have here, there's another word for the integrated human machine robotic. It's called transhuman. People have heard of the word transhumanism, right? There's a society called Humanity Plus that argues we should just, change our DNA, change whatever we become. One research scientist said, if a soldier can be more resilient with donkey DNA, put it in their bodies, okay? And when I argued against it, he actually called me bigoted. It was interesting. He goes, you're just bigoted as a humanist. I want to go wherever the boundaries will go. So I know you're not arguing for transhumanism, but I'll just lay this out here. I was brought up in a Christian framework. So way back to that thing about sense, think, act, and have values, ethics, and morals, right? I do think humans and animals are something special. That's why the word natural human, but it could be natural human and animal. I'm not really into genetically modifying animals either. I think it's a dignity thing. And so I think there is something to saying that this is a human with human DNA. And I know there's a slippery slope because I'm wearing glasses right now, okay? And my brother-in-law's got a stent in his heart. So that's why there's a really good question you ask, right? Where does the human line in that overlap become more machine than human, right? I mean, so I would just say my biases, my upbringing is there is something sacred about a human. I look at my grandbaby and she has a soul, is what I would say, and I know that may be dated to some, but that's what I would say. But open the question to other people, that's a great question. Other thoughts? Go ahead, get up with you.
Yeah, because if the human is sacred, then shouldn't things that come out of the human through the human mind and through human interaction, should that also not have those vestiges of sacredness?
Well, here's one other thought for you. And I still stand by the preserving the natural and the human, which is, Teddy Roosevelt and the national parks, I think the national parks were established officially in 1916, officially. So they were seeing industrialization pounding into nature and they drew some lines. But interestingly, you raise a question that I just saw in that AI study and a young student of mine raised. He says, the robots and cyberspace are going to take on the values of humanity. We better be sure they are Western democratic, Japanese democratic, Indian democratic. I mean, he was kind of drawing some lines of the democracies, because otherwise they could be dystopian, authoritarian. And I'm not going to mention the country that he thinks is going down there. There's two countries. And he says, we are in a battle to humanize the robotic and cyberspace. So he would probably have empathy with your position. I think he'd still say there's something special about a human being that's natural born. But he would build on what you're saying those human values are going to overwhelm the two realms, machine and cyberspace, and they're going to take on those values. And I'll give you one last thing that was in the brief in November. There is an institute called the Machine Intelligence Research Institute in Silicon Valley that is dedicated to that proposition, that we need more programmers, more ethicists, more political scientists that will help code a humane, humanistically empathy intelligent machines. That is their whole goal. So I don't know if that helps build on your observation.
So the premise was that we could create monsters and we could create non-human things, right? That's why we need to humanize, we need to make it human. All of these come from the premise that we are capable of creating monsters. We're capable of creating non-human or anti-human machines, technologies, processes, all of those things. So that's the part. If everything that comes out of a human is sacred, where is the question of these machines and these technologies not being sacred?
Yeah, I would just, I've been around like the AEGIS system that Dennis taught. I mean, I began to get interested in this because the system got out of control and shot down an Iranian airliner and killed 200 people. And our ship went in to relieve the ship that killed all those people. And I thought, wow, they lost control of the machine. It was programmed too aggressively. And so, these machines can take on some very aggressive elements too. So I think we're agreeing on a lot of things. I would just say there still is something sacred of keeping at least something in that green space.
Okay.
But hey, Dennis, I see one of my
I'm gonna
bosses
break in
asking
here.
questions.
I want to get to Jill Louters has some questions
Yes.
I'd like us to get to. Is
Yes,
Jill
thank you.
still on? Jill, would you be willing to ask your questions?
I am. I'm here. Good afternoon. Just a simple question, but when we think about creativity and our need to solve and work towards crafting that new future together, in my experience, so many times regulation, right, kind of captures our opportunity to be creative. How do we do that? And it's really more just a reflective question, but we need an opportunity to create those structures and pathways that are future focused. And I think we have the capacity as humans to have those conversations, to work towards building those relationships and supports. It's just sometimes those restrictors are really difficult to work around. So just an observation. Thank you.
Oh, no, Jill, you're exactly right. And if you're able to hang on, I do have a couple of slides that get to NDUS and the university trying, and she's also the head of our academic student affairs committee. So she has a lot of influence if professors do want to provide feedback in a bit. But, there's some things we might need to think about. Accelerating the promotion of younger people with knowledge that's crucial, and partnering. So yeah, you make a good point.
Thank you.
Let's do Doug Darling's question if we can, and then move into your slides.
Okay, sure.
So is Doug Darling there to ask his question about integrated machines and what standard we're using?
Oh, sure. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
So whose ethics, morals, empathy, and feelings will be used in decision-making with decisions made by, AI, things like Siri, Alexa, or others? Is it going to be whoever programmed it? Is it going to be the company owner? Is it going to be somebody from the government? I guess those are the questions I have with relying on machines to make decisions.
I would just say, and then I can open up to Dennis, your opinion. You've hit on a huge question, Doug. And I think after what happened, and again, I'm apolitical, but after what happened when the owners of massive cloud servers just shut down, a whole bunch of social media that they didn't agree with, this issue is fully in play now. Exactly. What if you programmed an algorithm to say, shut it down? And so there wasn't anybody you could complain to, right? Because apparently Mr. Zuckerberg was interviewed yesterday and he goes, the reason we took the action we did, and he sent web crawlers through his 1.2 billion people looking for certain phrases, which just sends a chill down the spine, I think, of anybody on any political spectrum. And he said, we had to do it because government's too slow. So I think this is a role for the government leaders. That's why I proposed the president have a task force. We got to get ahead of this because it's going so fast, right? That right now it's a few people. It's the head of Twitter and Facebook and Google literally are controlled. Google is controlled voting interest by the two founders. Zuckerberg has controlling interest of his company, and the guy of Twitter, I forget his name. So there are four people who can have controlling interest in those three companies. So yeah, even before we get to the algorithms, it's like 4 people having that power. Yeah. Other question, Dennis, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I'll just say this quickly. So there's even a bigger problem. So if you're doing this within a company, you've got their algorithms on how to do it. And then other companies might have other emphasis on other values. And so you'd have machines fighting with machines over these values, which is even more science fiction frightening. But Mark, why don't you go into your final slides for us, please?
Okay, all right. All right, so so this is national level stuff, you know, that hopefully states and governors and presidents could do. But again, this is our challenge, right? We're on the front line of this. And I have a book, if I would show you, called The Breakdown of Higher Education by John Ellis, who said there has become in such conformity on institutions on the 2 coasts that he says, I'm hoping the Midwest is able to still be science-based and not controlling people's thinking and political correctness. And so the educators here may have a bigger role than you think by the fact that you're still welcoming freedom of expression of all different views to do these things here, creating, writing code, civilizing the technology, and teaching learners how to learn, okay? But yeah, John Ellis, a California educator, basically said he hoped the upper plains could help tackle these big problems. So there's a bunch of literature saying massive disruption is coming. There's a book, Robot Proof, the president of Northeastern's been out for a couple of years. He talks about 3 categories, engineering, building real things, coding, and then the humanities. Because of, I mean, it's almost like he and I were talking about the same thing, human, code, and machines, that those would be the 3 bases of general knowledge one would have. Crow and his 5th wave says you've got to double down on funding higher education, and almost he says it's got to be free for everybody. I kind of read that between the lines. Alexander, Academia Next, he says, man, this is a big problem. And he talks about some schools just reverting to very much, you know, no technology, people come to the class, chalkboard, great books, you know, that there may be a split among schools offering specialties. There'll be hybrid, and there'll be all the big online megas, right? And there's Ellis's reference about the unique role of the Midwest. The problem in North Dakota, getting back to Dr. Louder's, is we are starved in many ways for investment and capital to respond to this stuff. 4 states get 80% of venture capital building the new digital robotic economy. 4 states. North Dakota is 49th out of 50 in 2018. We might have bumped up a little, okay? And that's why I just left the legacy briefing with Representative Delzer and Schmidt and Martinson and Sorbog from Fargo debating getting more money for higher ed out of the legacy fund because we know we've got a problem. It's also a human capital problem, all right? Poaching many of our young rising people. I know 6 digital scientists that have been poached between the 2 research institutions and one from Minot who led their whole computer science program. Is there help coming? Senator Schumer has a massive bill, $100 billion, but I hate to say it, it's in many ways focused on already large hubs. So it'll be 10 large hubs that'll get most of the money, and Minneapolis is one of the hubs that's flagged. I'm working actually with 8 other states, let's see, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, and Utah, maybe Nebraska. So what is that, 9? To propose to Senator Schumer maybe a regional hub that uses virtual connections so we can get some of this money that's coming in. And again, I've written on basically a land grant infusion. So at the high level policy, big money may be coming, and maybe with President Biden, there may be even more likelihood it's coming, okay? So what do we need to do? I'd say because of the overlaps, we've got to have interdisciplinary learning, okay? And I know a lot of it's happening, but where the human, the machine, code come together, the medical needs of a human, the law, policy, ethics, the environment, right? The earth, right? We're chewing the earth up pretty quick, right? And you could almost put human, natural, and earth under that green thing, right? And so one thought I had out there, you know, building on what you've been building, Dennis, and this could also relate to the Dakota Digital Academy, but it's very popular now at many universities to have a science, technology, environment, and society programs. Montana State just started one. Apparently a big benefactor wrote a check. MIT, Virginia Tech's had this for years. They've just started a bigger addition to it. They, by the way, helped win the Amazon contract. So my thought is across the 11 campuses, including the trades and the people who program the machines and run the machines, as well as those who conceive the code, but those who write the law, policy, ethics, this might be a thought for us to consider, building on NPI and the Dakota Digital Academy. The next slide would be, okay, what else do we need to do? I think we really need to accelerate the tenure process. I know there's shaking going on now, but Dennis, the speed at which knowledge is changing, both in the humanities and the digital sciences, is so fast that to ask somebody to, go through undergrad, master's, a doctorate, then wait, 6 years to be on the tenure track. I mean, they're getting, into their early 30s, right? And you and I know the whole tenure structure, what was built out of the Middle Ages at Oxford and Cambridge, and things were not changing that fast. So that would be one. I think we need to build on the tenure thing. It's something unique that appeals. Lots of universities are jettisoning it, but we need to modify. When I say digital talent, that means also law, policy, ethics. Like Dennis, if you're hiring a leading writer on digital ethics, you say, hey, we have an accelerated track for you, and we've got money to help fund your research. Please come here, and poach them away from, Denver. I think more partnerships, because to get scale and scope, we can't do it alone, right? Because we can't build it fast enough. And so more partnerships, and then this is where this white labeling came in. I can tell you how fast it's changing. White labeling is the idea that Western governors, that's the WGU thing, they are supposed to help Western states with their education. But just a year ago, I asked them, could you help us fill some hard to fill computer science professors like at Minot and other things? And they said, I think, Doug, you might have been in that conversation. They said their logo had to be on top of any class that he or she taught. And I'm like, well, then people are going to just gravitate to your university. In the interim 18 months, I've now been told both ASU and WGU are like, you know what? We need to just help partner whoever helps. And it'll be a white label, put your own label on there. Of course, they'll get some of the revenue, but it's beginning to change. That if we can help you build faster, that you're still in the hiring process, haven't hired your talent yet, we'll help partner with you. And then the last one on the bottom is what I've already mentioned about AI and whatnot, is partnerships of states and organizations across a region, so we can get critical mass that is hard to do on a single campus. And then the last slide is basically about, engaging the adult learners, the ones that are just being massively disrupted by this, that in the past they had quite a bit of career stability. And now they don't, or the people out in rural, tribal, small town populations that can't come to the campuses. How do we help them, reach out? So while our typical undergraduate group of 18-year-olds is holding fairly steady in North Dakota, we're not Maine. So I want any listeners that, Maine and other places are depopulating. We are not. We're one of the top 3 growing states in the country, and Minnesota is kind of flat. Montana's growing, South Dakota's growing. That we still have a lot of 18, 19-year-olds that'll be coming, but we have huge growth opportunities, I think, among the adult learners who've got to come back and maybe just want to come back and learn about this stuff. So anyway, those are the couple slides. I can back up to the first one or the second one, wherever people want to go. But I'll stop there.
Well, do we have additional questions for the Chancellor? I know we're running, usually our sessions end at 1 p.m., so we're going a little long, but we have a little bit of time for extra question. One would be, I think we should emphasize creative thinking, because a lot of what we're talking about here is not only critical reasoning, maybe we overemphasize critical reasoning. It's important, it's essential. But we're not as good at creative thinking anymore to think of the consequences, to think of how we can do things in a way that makes sense. And even those who need retraining might need retraining because they don't have the creative thinking to be able to think of how the world could be and how they could fit in it in a new way. What do you think, Mark?
No, I'm sitting here, Dennis, and I have my Society of Critical Thinking book. It's a little thing here by Richard Paul and Linda Elder. That's a great observation because it's all about someone's existing point of view and you deconstruct it basically, right? So you're right. I'm looking at it, getting a sinking feeling. Right here, their key values: clarity, accuracy, precision, relevance, depth, breadth, logic, significance, and was it fair? The word creative isn't even on the list.
But that's the innovation. That's what when the governor talks about being entrepreneurial and so on, you need critical reasoning, but you also need that creative thinking. That's the spark that I think that machines are never going to have. At least I hope they don't have that.
Well, and it may be human machine teaming, but yeah. I also see another board members on there. Danita Bai, if you want to speak up, Danita, I'm sorry I missed you on there. Very thoughtful person, published author, focuses on the younger generation changing, but also she's in the energy industry and lived many years in Minneapolis, in the big city. We're glad she came back home. But anybody want to take on Dennis's observation?
They've learned to fear me, so that's okay.
Do we have any people left?
Ken Lepper has been doing comments. Ken, do you want to talk about your comment? Expand on it a little bit.
Sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button. No, I was just throwing that out to the group that I agree entirely with the concerns and the evaluation of the problems. And I just, from my personal view, I just felt like a lot of the suggested responses would end up in the long run, not 2 years from now, but further down the road, not really creating a stronger academia or a stronger higher ed system. And it's just my opinion. I'm not willing to have a debate or anything like that. I was just sharing for other people to think about.
Yeah, no, it's a tough problem.
How it might harm academia? I've got my own ideas, but I want to hear what yours are.
Well, the things that stand out to me is, I mean, these broad initiatives, everyone thinks of those as a good thing, but what I think would be better is to convince the funding agencies that it's still okay to fund small projects and individual researchers. You don't have to fund a 75 university collaborative for, $100 million. Individuals can still do good things that add to society. And this is just my own opinion. I think within North Dakota, we're putting way, way, way too much emphasis on non-traditional learners. But that's just my own thinking about what higher ed is and what higher ed means. I'm not in administration, and that's probably why.
Well, Ken, I would just say we are fully devoted. That's why we have 11 campuses, which I find amusing when people say you got to close the campus. The Chronicle of Higher Ed did a study, and North Dakota was the worst education desert in the nation, because once you get past Jamestown, there's a handful of colleges to cover this huge state. You got to drive, 200 miles round trip for welding class, and so I think our state is ahead of the game in that we have on-premise learning where people can connect. They can look at that professor who says, I'm going to get you through, and not look at some screen. But we also have so many people at a distance who can't get to the campus. You know what I mean? I mean, like this weather, has been a blessing this winter. But gosh, remember 2 winters ago, 52 inches of snow, you couldn't get anywhere. And so then you can take classes. So I think we're trying to balance both. And I have 2 of my bosses, 2 board members are on here. That is a direct objective of the state board is access to those however they need it, walking on the campus, meet their needs, or help them in a small town which is too far to drive. So we're trying to balance those two things, if that helps.
So if there's one more question, or we can wrap up now.
Dennis?
And in fact, I think we should wrap up. We're usually done at 1 o'clock, but there's so much interest in talking with the chancellor, we went over. So I was naughty about that, but what I'm going to do is just wrap us up. Just to remind folks, there are a couple of upcoming events for the Northern Plains Ethics Institute. 2 weeks from today will be Dave Thiel from the North Dakota Ethics Commission Director. He'll be presenting about the North Dakota Ethics Commission, so we can learn more about that. On the 22nd of February at 12, we have Kim Tallbear, who will be talking about indigenization, reconciliation, decolonization in science. So we invite you to that. Of course, what we did today, by the way, will be recorded. It has been recorded. It will be edited. It will be made available on the Northern Plains Ethics Institute website, on our YouTube channel, and on Facebook. Now I want to thank the Chancellor. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule, especially during a legislative session, to give us this view, well-considered view on the impact of technology on education and how we have to bring liberal arts and other factors into it so that we can humanize the technology and hopefully not make humans too much technology. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for publishing
thank you,
and for
the
doing.
rest of you for coming. Have a great day.